All right. How I think we're the looks like the number of people coming in is increasing. So I think the time to get us to get ourselves underway with where we're at this week. So Dr. Andy and my colleague Alan Williams in Perth. Dr. Andy is based in the Philippines. My name is Perry Hobson. I'm based in Malaysia. This week we're going to be looking at the focus on delivering customer experience in a post-COVID world. Dr. Andy, I think you're going to start off this week's seminar looking at things that are happening in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, that's true, Perry. But before we begin, we do want to thank our first inaugural sponsor, Lyceum of the Philippines University, LPU, our friends Tina Aquino, and many of the times we've been there to talk with the students have graciously offered to sponsor this session. And they're sponsoring it by providing a certificate for their students who attend this session. And that certificate will be a digital certificate. All the LPU students will receive if they attend the full session, if they post a question on the question and answer board. And also after the seminar is over, probably about an hour after the seminar is over, everyone that attends the seminar will get a survey. We'd like everyone to complete that survey, and the LPU students will be able to get the certificate if they complete that survey. And in the survey for the LPU students, there's additional questions in order for them to get a proper certificate. So we appreciate the sponsorship, and we look forward to having future sponsors from different schools in the future to help cover the cost of doing these kinds of programs. And Alan?
Yes, sorry, sorry, Andy. I was just going to say we'll start the session very shortly, but I guess not only a warm welcome to all the students from Australia, but I'd also like to welcome some colleagues and professional people that have also joined us today, and in particular Professor Ross Dowling, who's an expert in cruise ship tourism and will be joining us down the track as a guest speaker. So welcome to Ross Dowling. And we'll hand it over to you, Andy. You can, I think, kick off today's session, and we look forward to another exciting day.
Very good, thank you, Alan. And the topic I was discussing today was going to be about the restaurant industry. And after the restaurant industry, after this thing starts, the question will be, what will customers expect from restaurant operators after COVID-19? To me, what's the most important thing a restaurant is going to need to do is to reestablish trust with their customers. And we'll talk about the way I think that we can do that. And I'm also going to ask for students and educators who can do their part to help improve industry standards. And for those, there was some discussion last week about our young photos that we use. Well, I updated my photo so that it's a real photo this week too. So we're trying to improve every week. But we're going to start this. We're going to start this session today that restaurants will actually need to adapt or die. This is a photo of a previous restaurant. You know, you look at this picture and you say, that's a restaurant, it's a clean kitchen, they're in their uniforms, they look great. That's what we come to expect in the past for the future. But what's going to happen now? The expectations are going to be higher. Restaurant operators are going to have to portray an image of perfection in sanitation, hygiene, and so forth in order for customers to believe that they can go there and enjoy the meal in a safe place. So we're going to start today's session out with the very first polling question we've done. And our first polling question is very simple. If you were going to take your family out for dinner, which of these two restaurants would you choose? The top photo or the bottom photo? So I'm going to send I'm going to launch that poll right now and ask everyone to make a quick vote. And we'll let that question go out there as I continue this discussion, because sanitation is going to be one thing that's important, but we've always been concerned about sanitation. We've always tried to do our best, but it's not going to be good enough in the future. So what I'm going to talk about today is I think is the most easiest way for the restaurant industry to improve its image and regain trust with their customers is to wash their hands. Now, you have all been in bathrooms around the world and you've seen this sign, employees must wash their hands before returning to work. Well, and you've also seen that many people do not wash their hands. That is the discussion I'm going to have with you today, because if you see this little cartoon, the future is going to be different. This guy's walking out of the restroom and he didn't wash his hand. You can see the alarm above going, ringing, and everybody's going, oh no, he didn't wash his hands. That's not the way we do it. The same is going to be true in a kitchen. All your employees are going to have to wash their hands. But how do you prove to your customers that you're doing it? Well, if you look at the statistics, according to Professor Christos, 30% of people don't wash their hands. That means 70% do wash their hands. But 50% of those people that even wash their hands don't do it right. That is the concern. So the question I have for you is, did you wash your hands? So the results of our first poll are coming in very quickly. We have 126 voting for the bottom photo. The bottom photo is where everybody had their gloves on, their mask on, their shield. Yes, I would expect that. 33 said the top photo, it's still okay. And you're right, it's still okay for the top photo. But if you want to regain trust, most people are saying that the bottom photo is the best. So I'm going to end that poll now. And we're going to do our next poll. And we'll share the results here so everybody can see what was going on there. Okay. Okay, and the next question I had, and the poll's not working, so we'll move on, is did you wash your hands today? And so go ahead, and if you want to make a wave, you can wave your hand on your attendees. Did you wash your hands properly, which means 20 seconds with soap and water. That's a key term I'm going to be asking you about. Did you wash your hands? Because if you look at this picture, if you don't wash your hands properly, then bacteria and viruses and all that bad stuff is still on your hands. And you can see the picture, the bottom two pictures, where this is with soap for 15 seconds and this is soap for 30 seconds, compared to the pictures on top where the bacteria is still there. So washing your hands properly is not an easy task. So when it's time to look at hand washing stations in the kitchen, I am expecting the industry to upgrade these stations with touchless soap dispensers, making sure towels are there, making sure they have all the equipment there, and making sure that they're used. The policies must be enforced. Now, one interesting example I saw, they had a hand washing timer. This is actually pretty good. I can foresee this being at all stations where you show people that you're not washing your hands long enough. So it has to become an industry standard for people to wash their hands. I'll give you one more example. I just saw this the other day. This is an inventor. He came up with this faucet that has a light that blinks as the water starts running. And so it blinks and blinks and blinks, so you can physically see how long it is for you to wash your hands properly. Some people sing songs. I'm going to show you a song later, but first we're going to continue the discussion on washing hands. Or will we actually have cameras on the sinks to ensure that your staff and even customers are washing their hands? There's going to be a great emphasis on washing hands in the future. That's my belief. So do you know how to wash your hands properly? This is a wonderful video. You see the guy has his black gloves on. He has some white substance on there to show you how to wash your hands. Thanks, but the point of the video is actually to wash your hands properly. Requires you to do several different functions. Now, a lot of people use posters and signs to promote their people to wash their hands. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. Hand washing movement. So here's my comment for today is the hand washing movement. We all need to do our best to model hand washing practices. And you as a student can start at home. Teach your little brothers, show your things. By you modeling how to wash your hands properly is a way to show other people that they should be doing it too. The second part is it's time to demand clean sinks, soap, towels, and assurance that both staff and customers are washing hands in your restaurants. If you go into a restaurant and the sink doesn't have soap, if there's no towels, if the sink is dirty, you need to complain to the manager and give them some advice to say, you need to upgrade your sink so that the sanitation practices are appropriate for us to regain trust with your restaurant. And then starting today, because if we don't start washing our hands today, all of us, then we're not doing our part. COVID-19 will continue to spread around the world. And this is the easiest way for us to improve our industry is by upgrading this very simple standard that will allow customers to see that everyone is washing their hands, and then you will also be able to prove to them that you have a clean establishment. Now, the only thing I can say as I end my session here is please go wash your hands. And that's going to be my focus for today's talk. And again, we try to focus on one topic, and my focus today was washing your hands in order to improve the industry standards and regaining trust in a restaurant. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Andy. Very interesting presentation, and you're right. The theory shows that that's one of the most basic ways of helping to stop the spread of this COVID-19. Just a quick question I've got. What about students that are at work, carrying out their duties? They don't always have direct access to soap and a wash hand basin. What do you suggest they do to keep their hands clean in the midst of a daily routine?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alan. Many people go places, they travel, they walk into a restaurant, or they use a public restroom and there's no soap, the water's not running right, or whatever. So yes, you do have to carry your hand sanitizer with you. But you have to realize that washing your hands with soap is a much more effective way to clean your hands. Sanitizers are alcohol-based, 70% or above. If you use a hand sanitizer and you use it properly, cover your hand, it's great, but it only lasts a short period of time because the alcohol evaporates. So always carry your hand sanitizer, always use it whenever you have to, but as much as you can, please make sure you wash your hands each and every day. So thank you for that question. And Alan, now it's time for you to move on to our next topic, and I think you're talking about hotels today, is that true?
Thanks very much, Andy, and I hope that everybody's got my presentation up on the screen. And yes, a very interesting presentation as always. Give Dr. Andy a round of applause, everybody, a virtual round of applause. As usual, a very, very interesting session. As I mentioned before, I'm speaking to you from Perth, Western Australia, and there's a picture of lovely old Perth and the location or proximity of where I am compared to everybody else. And my theme also today carries on from last week's theme, delivering the customer experience in a post-COVID world. Are you ready? So as Professor Hobson or Perry outlined last week, we don't know for how long the virus is going to be around and ultimately what the impacts are to the world economy, let alone the hospitality and tourism industry. But what I'd like to do today is just speak about some very basic things that you might be able to look at with your hotels, with your workplaces, that might assist in ensuring that the hotel is prepared as best as they can to deal with the COVID situation and post-COVID. So the three things that I'd like to talk about today are the guest arrival and welcome, the guest check-in, and ultimately the guest escorting the guest to the rooms, which is the standard practice. If we concentrate a little bit on the pre-arrival, I think it's always interesting that in the early days, when I was traveling to different countries, when somebody asked me what I did for a living, I used to say, I work in the hospitality industry. And I was always amazed by the number of people that mistook that for you work in hospitals. And it's an interesting dilemma now, because I think hospitality and hospitals are almost becoming one and the same thing. I'd like to give you a little more thought as to health and hygiene practices, and again, concentrating on guest safety during this important time, or this pandemic time of COVID-19. So if we talk about the guest arrival, even before they get into the hotel, we've got ideas of personal hygiene. We've also got examples of concierge hygiene and workplace hygiene, the environment. At the guest arrival, I guess what we want to do, and this picture is all too common about guests arriving in the hotel. I think we all know that we need to welcome guests with a warm smile, warm and friendly greeting, and a welcome to the hotel. And questions in the past have been, can I help you with your baggage? Can I open the door for you? And obviously showing guests to the hotel reception. Nowadays, it might be a little more important, and this picture is probably not that normal, although becoming more a normal commonplace in the hospitality industry. Guests arriving fully armed up with personal protective equipment, and hotel staff working in cleaning equipment and working with cleaning gear to ensure that door handles are clean, the reception area is clean, and so on. So I think, as we've mentioned last week, cleaning routines will become much more visible through the guest arrival process. Not only maybe cleaning the door handles of cars, but making sure that the doors of the hotels are clean, or in fact using technology to adopt revolving doors or automated doors and so on. I think it's also important for staff to think about their use of personal and protective equipment, or PPE equipment, and how they might adapt to making the guest feeling welcome whilst wearing that equipment. One of the things that we want to speak about is hospitality and guests, both guest and staff health. I think, as Andy's already said, hotels will need to set up health stations, and this might be a good use for the future hotel reception area. Dr. Andy's already mentioned about cleaning hands, but allowing guests to use hand sanitizers and maybe even supplying complimentary face masks would be an important thing. And maybe the question to guests in the future is not so much about how many bags do you have, but can I take your temperature, just to make sure that the guest and their health is good in terms of allowing them to come into the hotel and minimizing impacts or risks to other guests. There's obviously, carrying on from my theme last week, a whole range of very good uses or examples of hotels adopting technology. And this is a picture of technology being used in the Sofitel Hotel in Sydney, where repurposing of hotel robots to deliver hand sanitizers and face masks to guests is currently being undertaken. But the guest check-in itself, all of us have probably experienced this or work in this scenario where when you go into a hotel reception area, generally the reception areas are crowded spaces with lots of people, and they're fairly disorganized. They're almost an organized chaos. And I think the future of that is about reducing the number of touch points and about organizing it a little bit better and looking at social spaces and social distancing. And one of the ways that might happen is by introducing technology into the guest arrival process, marking the grounds to ensure that the guests are using proper social distancing norms, using smart technologies, the self-check-in kiosks, or encouraging guests to use the mobile check-in technologies that are available, and there are many hotels that are adopting those technologies, and the use of digital keys. Perry mentioned last week in his presentation biometrics technology that's been used in the travel industry, and maybe even allotting staff to supervise the guests as they move through the hotel reception, just to make sure that everybody is comfortable, everybody's safe, and that everybody's aware of processes and procedures in this time. Some of these practices have been used very effectively in the world, especially the smart technology and the mobile check-in. I'll just like to run this video for you, and let's see how we go. As Andy pointed out, we have a challenge with technology.
Vegas is a place where you see amazing tech all the time.
Aria and Vdara are two immensely beautiful resorts located on the Las Vegas Strip. Technology is very important. It's almost our identity. Mobile check-in is something that we've recently launched, and what mobile check-in does is offer our guests the opportunity to check in from anywhere around the world on their mobile device. Walk right up, scan your code, and get your keys. It's as simple as that. Once they enter the room, the lights turn on, the drapes open, the television turns on. It's a smart room, it's an intuitive room, it understands you and it knows your needs.
So that's just a simple example of technology being used in a number of hotels, and the use of mobile technologies and self-check-in kiosks. I guess what we also need to understand is, escorting the guest to their room, where now you've got the use of personal protection equipment and social distancing being practiced by concierges. You can see hotel staff dressed in safety gear. This is an example of a hotel that was actually looking after COVID-19 positive people in isolation periods. But I guess it is becoming a little bit of the norm whilst we're in this pandemic, and it might be something that will be practiced afterwards. I mentioned last week that maybe even transporting guest bags via autonomous vehicles to the rooms and so on. So what I'd like to do is end on that note, and maybe leave some of the other room technologies that we can speak about to my presentation next week. And I'll close off with a slide today with the presentation or a campaign that's been used by the Shangri-La Hotel, a very recent campaign, always care, always here. So I guess it's important that throughout this time, and whilst we talk about technology, caring for the guests and taking care of their needs and their health is even more of a priority today. It's really, really important. And last week, some of the attendees asked about what slides or what websites to use. There's just a couple of the references that will be available for you to look at. There are some very, very good ideas already published by the World Health Organization and various countries, various health organizations about how to prepare your hotel in this COVID time and post-COVID time. So thank you very much. And I'd like to hand you over to Professor Hobson for his presentation. Dr. Hobson, are you there?
Well, yes, thanks very much for that, Alan. And look, just before I start, just a quick question. Out of the various things you showed everybody today, some of the technology is already being trialed, some of it's not yet coming yet. What do you think is going to be probably taken up the fastest or the most rapidly by the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the technology being used in the pre-arrival, the reservations process, as well as probably the check-in technologies. So I think mobile check-in technologies and also kiosk check-in technologies are available quite widespread through the travel industry, and will certainly be adopted by the hospitality industry, probably the quickest in my view. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I think that's probably a pretty good lead into what I'm going to be looking at talking about today, particularly focusing on the airline industry and some of the challenges that the airline industry is seeing. So again, I'd like to give a big welcome to everybody. And again, apologies for anyone who wasn't able to join us last week, that there is a video that's loaded up. And I'd like to particularly to welcome our students from LPU in the Philippines. I've visited many of the campuses. And of course, a big shout out to my students from Sunway University here in Malaysia. So this week has been quite a week if you've been following the news, seeing what's been happening around the world. So quite a lot has been going on, and the implications of all that. So let me just start, sadly, with a bit of a dire prediction. A couple of comments that were made by a well-known British travel journalist who said, I think 2019 will be the year of peak travel. And his feeling is we won't get back to that again. Whereas what we've seen from other ones is that if we look forward to 2022, some people are predicting that travel will only increase by about, if it decreases by about a third, that'll be a success. So people are not being particularly optimistic about how we're going to escape from this pandemic and the implications of that. Last week I shared this slide, which was showing that in previous epidemics, things back to normal within about 6 to 7 months typically. But people are seeing that with COVID-19, this is going to be a very different and difficult situation that we're going to be faced with. Now, there's mixed reports coming out from the industry. This slide caught my attention because this is from a carrier based in the UK, EasyJet. And the headline, as you can see, is in bold there. It says, EasyJet says bookings for winter are well ahead of the equivalent point last year. So that the bit was bolded by the newspaper. But if you look at the underneath it, it says, Britain's biggest budget airline could see its fleet shrink by 1/6 in 3 years. So, you know, there's a mixed pattern of some people thinking some good news along with a lot of bad news. And we're seeing that a bit across the industry. A number of airlines have already struggling, and the future for a number of airlines is not looking particularly good. Now, some of this you can see because yesterday we saw a very interesting phenomenon with a massive drop in the price of oil. Now, obviously, airlines, cruise ships, anything that moves depends on oil. And yesterday, the price of oil dropped into negative territory. So about a month before COVID hit, it was about $80 a barrel. And yesterday, the spot price got down to minus $34. In other words, basically, they were going to be paying you to take the oil away. So it's now bounced back to about $20 but basically what that's saying is that people who have a lot of oil are not very optimistic that people are going to be using it in anything like much of a hurry, which gives us a bit of an indication as to what's going to be happening. Now, of course, the airline industry has been hit pretty hard with this. Already South African Airlines has announced it's going to shed all its staff. And then just yesterday in Australia, Virgin Australia slumped into administration. So it had been struggling for a while, but as the situation with a lot of airlines and not being that profitable, so this COVID situation is rather pushing them over the edge. So following on from Dr. Andy's presentations and from Alan's today, how are things going to change? Well, for airlines and airports, it's going to be very much in a similar vein. The focus we saw of the airline industry ever since 9/11 was on security, and that focus is very clearly going to shift towards health. And this is going to bring in a whole raft of new regulations, ability to how people move through airports, and as you heard from Alan talk about hotels. And moving people, and obviously travel depends on that, and the airline industry is critical to being able to do that. So how we come out of this pandemic, particularly for international tourism, watching and seeing how the airline industry is able to handle the situation. Now, you've heard a little bit about the concept of social distancing, and they've probably picked that up in the media. And in many countries, people are talking about 1 meter, or is it 2 meters? Well, the bad news from some researchers at MIT is that when people cough or sneeze, they can actually spread the virus 8 meters. Now, this presents particularly the tourism industry and airlines with some pretty major challenges. So already we're seeing airports and airlines talk a lot about social distancing, but as we come out of this recovery period and we want to get people traveling, what's going to be safe distances? How are people going to travel safely? How are people going to be able to go to other countries safely? And health and sanitation, as I mentioned, are going to become very important. Now, already the airline industry is talking about 2 new concepts. One is what's called de-densification, and the other is neutralization. So the issues with the de-densification is how do you spread people out to maintain social distancing? Now, of course, most airlines make their money from cramming in as many people as they can onto the planes. So having lots of spare seats is going to be challenging financially. And, you know, particularly if airlines have to specify which seats can't be used under neutralization. Now, already some airlines are pushing back. Ryanair, which is one of Europe's biggest budget airlines, has already pushed back, accusing regulators of sitting in their bedrooms inventing regulations and pointing out that this just isn't going to work financially for the industry. So this is going to be quite a challenge as we go forward from here. Now, some other regulations are already coming in, saying that on flights, toilets are now going to have to be cleaned every time they've been used 10 times. We're going to have to reserve particular areas on aeroplanes in case people show any signs or symptoms. So we're already beginning to sense some of these things are coming around and will be hitting the industry. A couple of airlines have already been quite proactive in testing different ways forward. So Emirates Airlines last week launched a new test which can be done in 10 minutes. This was trialled on a flight from Dubai to Tunisia. And also have insisted that passengers are going to have to bring their own masks, which they'll have to wear at the airport and on the planes. So we can begin to see some airlines trying to get on the front foot, and their next door neighbour, Etihad, which is also based in the UAE, is now looking at trialling this technology, which is a no-hands touch point. Now, I mentioned this one last week, and basically what they're looking at doing is having a machine that can read your temperature, can look at your health check, and again, you don't have to touch anything. So we're moving and moving into a space of lots of hands-free type of technologies. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, moving forward with the pandemics is going to be a big issue. So we've got to make sure that people who travel are healthy, and this is going to mean new forms of health declarations, visa applications. We're already seeing some passengers. So before lots of people went into full lockdown, this is supermodel Naomi Campbell, who invented what's now being termed hazmat chic for her flights. But of course, it's not just about passengers who are worried, it's about the crew. And whilst getting through airports is going to become a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging. So how are we going to look after passengers? Well, part of that will be this move to biometrics. So again, it'll be facial technology. You won't need to touch anything. We already saw at airports now social distancing. This is Bali Airport. And before they went into lockdown, they'd already started that, trying to get people 1 meter apart. And you can see this at the airport here, where they blocked off seats where people can sit next to each other. Now, this is going to be very difficult. In India, they're saying, look, we can't do 2 meters. Maybe we can do 1.5, because there's an awful lot of people there. And you can see how packed their airports get. So this is going to make things really quite challenging. So as was shown with check-in at hotels, we can use boarding passes on mobile phones, or we can use biometrics at the airport. On the planes, we're going to be seeing new forms of uniforms. This came in a few weeks ago in Taiwan. And last week, in fact, Philippine Airlines has been the first to launch a designer in-flight protective gear. So here are the staff wearing that new in-flight protective gear to help them stay healthy. Some airlines are now looking, and interior designers, at ways of creating new spaces. We can see here, if you can see this, they're putting plastic shields around passenger seats. So this company is an Italian company, Avio Interiors, who's trying to work out ways that you're unlikely to cough or sneeze on other people, and or maybe other ways of reversing seats using, if you like, plastic, using ways that you're not having to be quite so directly in contact with other people around you. Already a number of airlines had started to introduce things, and we can see what is happening. And of course, visitor arrivals will change as there's more focus on health, quarantine, with declarations, etc. All this will take time and space. And again, it'll be this introduction of using facial technologies more than touching things, because of the way that we see this virus move. So to end up, what are the implications for you? Well, first of all, this will be the whole set of issues about people's health. Are you ready to rethink every step of a customer's journey through an airport or an airline? Sanitation and cleanliness is going to become absolutely critical. And we need to think about that, as Anna mentioned, and as Andy's mentioned, both in restaurants, in hotels, on airlines. And this brings the question in, who's going to be the weakest link? Your business may be okay, but in an airport, we have to connect airports, immigration, security, duty-free shops, the airlines, ground handling, arrivals, all that has to be interconnected. And as I've kept mentioning, we're going to see a lot more hands-free and touch-free technologies. So next week, I'll be looking at charting a flight back to normality, but hopefully that's given you a few ideas and indication of what's probably going to be happening once we start to see travel and the airlines happening again. Dr. Andy.
Very good. Thank you, Professor Hobson, for that. I'm sure everybody appreciated learning what's happening in the airline industry. And actually, we have a very good question from Dan Miguel Antonio Garcia about the airline industry. And his question is, I saw a report that air travel will normalize by 2023. What is your reaction to that?
Well, as I mentioned when I started my presentation, I think those are in the pretty dire predictions. But if it takes a long time for us to get either a vaccine happening, then my theory is that it may take us that long to get back to the kind of air travel that we saw last year. And that's because countries will be concerned about opening up their borders. And that's the topic I'll be dealing with next week.
Okay, thank you. And Alan, we have an interesting question from Samwan Permandi, who's also from National Kaohsiung University of Hospitality and Tourism. His question is interesting because it says people stay in rooms. It's a green hotel, so they don't change the sheets every day. And therefore, how if the virus can live on clothing and material for a period of time, how will that affect the industry's perception of safety in a room?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam. Good question. At the end of the day, I would hope that the hotel is practicing very good hygiene, health, safety practices, and that the housekeeping processes in place are ensuring that it's safe for any guest to go into a room, and therefore the room is cleansed and hygienically safe before anybody checks into the room. So on that assumption, I would imagine that what you're referring to is if somebody checks into a room with the COVID-19 virus, how does it help that guest, and how might it affect any future guests? I guess it gets back to ensuring that the hotel processes, practices ensure that proper hygiene is taking place, proper cleaning practices are taking place. And there are also now a number of new guidelines being published by, as I mentioned before, various health organizations around the world. And in Australia, there's guidelines about how housekeeping practices need to change, right down to the sorts of chemicals that they might want to use. So whilst we know the virus can rest on different surfaces for different periods of time, I would hope that risk is eliminated if the proper cleaning practices are put in place.
Very good, thank you, Alan. Perry, why don't you tell us what you think, how will people react to the industry reopening, and how long do you think it's going to take before people are going to be comfortable going to an airport to check in?
Well, look, I think that's a very good question, and my crystal ball is unfortunately a little bit fuzzy at the moment, but my hunch is that it's going to take a bit of time. Whilst I think after various countries have been locked down, a lot of people want to travel. When you read some of the media, you're seeing lots of companies, cruise companies, airlines say that bookings for the summer or winter season, depending where you live, of course, are looking strong. Now, of course, I think people do want to travel. People want to get back to travel. The challenge is going to be is that this pandemic will probably go in waves. As I mentioned last week, the most dangerous wave of the Spanish flu 100 years ago was actually the second wave, not the first wave. Now, whilst we've got better technologies today, we're already seeing second waves happen in China, in Japan. And so my theory is that we will not wake up one morning and say, all clear, we can all start traveling again. This is going to take time. And everybody, students, the industry, is just going to have to be ready for that.
Perry, do you think, actually we have a question from Professor Charlene Chen. She says, will cheap, or I'll say low cost air travel possible after COVID-19? What do you think?
Oh, good question. Because I saw another question that was coming up there about the costs. Look, Ryanair has been very clear. They've said, look, if we leave every other seat empty, we're going to have to put up the airfares. And as you could see after 9/11, airports, countries put on security charges for every airport to cover the costs. So my hunch is that you're probably going to see air travel go up, probably, if we have to have social distancing with one seat empty, by at least 50%. You're also going to see additional fees at airports where you're going to be seeing a health charge. So you'll see a security charge and a health charge because the costs, and various countries are going to say, hey, we're not going to bear the costs. The airports are going to say, we can't absorb these costs. We need to pass them on to the passengers. So I think air travel is going to become a much more expensive proposition as we come out of this pandemic.
Very good. Thanks, Perry. Alan, there's an interesting question. Maybe you can do a little teaser on this one. But Beth Aragon basically says you covered changes in hotels, restaurants, and airlines. How about the cruise sector?
Yes, yes. Listen, I think everybody's fully aware that the cruise sector is one of the sectors of the travel tourism industry that's been hardest hit at the moment, given the fact that so much of the virus has emanated from what they believe, although it came out of China. The spread of the virus has come off cruise ships. Listen, I don't want to go into that in detail because it's another presentation altogether, but I would encourage people to watch the space as we move towards a presentation specifically focusing on the cruise industry. And I think we're planning that for around 2-3 weeks away. So maybe we leave that question till then. But in the meantime, maybe just a final response. I think the cruise industry definitely will bounce back like the travel industry, but it will bounce back and it will be different.
Very, very good. Yeah, we will have a guest speaker for that cruise industry talk in a few weeks. But I do have one more question about hand washing. And so the hand washing question is lukewarm water or cold water better for hand washing? And it's a very good question because I saw that very question asked to the experts on a TV in the TV show a couple of weeks ago. And the expert says it really doesn't matter that much, but the soap is what's more important. And the process of spending the 20 seconds washing your hands and using the proper procedures is more important than the temperature. But if you have lukewarm water, go for it. But don't be afraid to wash your hands in cold water. It'll help you too. I think we're going to ask comments from each of our speakers, last comments from everyone before we start to wrap up our show and put up our topics for next week.
Andy, maybe there's a comment, and I think it's quite relevant because of the location of many of our viewers and our students at the moment, specifically around micro-food outlets throughout Asia. And other than food safety, what might they do to regain their business position? But I think without going into the question around regaining their position, how might you suggest they look at ensuring proper hygiene, proper hand washing, and practices that might help them survive and look at a post-COVID world?
Barry, your closing thoughts for today's session?
Well, I'm pleased to see so many questions have come in about trying to work out where the future is and to predict things. And I don't want to be overly negative, but we also can't be overly positive as well. I think we've got to deal with this, constructively. And I think through these sessions, what we're trying to do is to show that there are ways forward. We're not going to easily go back to the way things were last year. That's just a reality that sadly we're just going to have to live with for now. But neither can we just all sit at home forever. We represent a very important industry, a very important amount of employment, very central to lots of people's lives. So I'm hoping that we can constructively find ways to get the industry back on its feet, but we're going to have to change. And I think as educators, as students looking to the future, we've got to be on the front foot of making sure that we can bring in those changes.
And there we go. Just a last minute question from Elaine Borazan. She asked from a researcher's perspective, what do you think should be our direction for future research related to tourism and hospitality? So that will be helping in terms of policies. So with the virus changing the industry, what kind of research do you see coming up in the future?
Well, a really good question there. I think it's going to have to be much more focused around people's about health, how psychologically people will adapt to that, make those changes. We are creatures of habit. We have a set way we've been used to doing things, and you've touched on that with hand washing or not doing it. How do we get people using things such as nudge theory to become more aware of the health and sanitation around them, of doing things, of thinking about health that way, of redesigning our systems, finding about consumer behavior, customer acceptance, understanding more about how this virus moves in the health and our own health connections. So health has never, to be honest, health hasn't been really at the forefront of our industry too much. I think that will now take front seat.
Very good. Good comments. Thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you for all of our attendees. We also want to thank LPU for sponsoring today's session by providing certificates to their students. I'm going to post our topics for next week right now. So let me share that screen. And next week, the session will have our next session on Wednesday at 2 o'clock, which seems to be a good time. It was well received by all the people. Technology in hotel rooms, maximizing guest experiences. Next week, I'm going to talk about social distancing next week and how will restaurants survive if they have to have social distancing. And again, Dr. Hobson will be talking about the airline industry and how it gets travel starting again. So with that said, we appreciate all the questions. We promise to keep our sessions to 45 minutes. We have done that. Sorry about the videos today. And we want to thank everyone for joining us for today's 30-minute talk. Thank you.
Thanks very much. See you next week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week. Thank you for joining us.